Welcome to Greek for a Week. I'm glad that you are viewing another week where we are working our way through the book of First Peter. So this week we are looking at verses 24 and 25, again of the larger paragraph, verses 22 through 25. So looking at these last two verses for this paragraph this week, will then next week we will diagram this entire paragraph here, 22 through 25. So here's verse 24 and verse 25. So we'll translate in this way. For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers, and the flower falls off. But the word of the Lord remains forever. And this is the word which was preached for you. So as we look through a couple of things here in these verses, you'll notice the first one, diati, is our conjunction that Peter uses to provide a scriptural basis, again, for the preceding discussion, which is verse 23. And it's really, he's introducing this Old Testament citation, which is Isaiah chapter 40, verses 6 through 8. So he's showing this relationship through the illustration of the Old Testament. Then he has here all flesh, and then he uses a comparative term, hos. Okay, so all flesh is like, and then here he makes a note here is like grass. Then he has a possessive genitive here, altes. He says here that this is, and then he says it's and all its glory. So its glory would refer back to the flesh. So not only is the flesh like grass, but it has glory, if you will, and that's also comparative to, because he uses hos again, is comparative again to the fact that the flower of grass. So then you have a couple of verbs here. You have here the exa ran the. Here is a third person singular. It's an aorist middle indicative. And Dubis states here that this is an example of a theta verb. So here we have a the, okay, a theta verb form that, though traditionally taken as passive or a passive deponent, is better read as a middle. Dubis is the one that has written the First Peter handbook through the Baylor New Testament Greek text series. Then you have your last verb here, the ekpesen, which is third person singular aorist active indicative of ekpipto. And so that's where we get the fact that the flower falls off. Then we get into verse 25. You have a de here, which basically is providing us with the next step in the argument. So in verse 24, he discusses that flesh is like grass. It's also making note of the fact that the grass withers and the flower falls off, but something remains, and it's the word there, it's the ta rema. This here, specifically, he's referencing the word of the Lord and that it remains. So the mene there is the third person singular, present active indicative of meno. And then how long does it remain? So here you have the ace ton iona. So that is a temporal idiom. Really, you could translate this until this age, or simply just write the word forever. Then you have a verbal form, euangelis then. Euangelis then. Here you have an aorist passive participle. neuter nominative singular of euangelizo, and that is an attributive participle that is referring back to the rhema. So here, this is referring back to specifically the rhema here, and it's this rhema that was specifically has the attribute, if you will, that it was preached, and then for whom? You could say the ace humas here, for the benefit of you. And I tend to think there the ta rhema refers back to the message of salvation that Peter references here in verses 22 and 23. And then again, in the larger scheme of things, it's that salvation message, that gospel that was preached. The recipients received that, hence that's the reason, as well as the motivational grounds for Peter saying that he is wanting them to love others. Trust this was helpful. That was verses 24 and 25. See you next week for a diagram.